Hello, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're watching this, and welcome to Painting with Stephen, episode 15. So, what I am bringing you today is a tomb. I wanted this to be one, inspired by my trip to Tuscany, but two, definitely wanted to bring more of an ethereal, creepy, still, eerie fantasy vibe to it. Playing around with the surreal, playing around with almost like a dreamlike, sort of otherworldly quality. And I've always been very fascinated with tombs, both in a historical and more sort of fantasy imagination setting, and that's why I really wanted to paint this. I think obviously this was a definite challenge, just because it's not quite in my wheelhouse, and so I looked to the symbolists, the Belgian symbolists, and symbolism in general to be inspired. So Ferdinand Keller, Bocklin, these great artists that at the turn of the 19th century, the fin de siècle attitude was, overtaking everyone with this great nihilism and cynicism, and these artists sort of more played into that. I think what's really interesting is what you could actually see is, you could argue that Belgian symbolism more widely, the French symbolism and all of its sort of offshoots, found at the latter stage of the 19th century, could really be argued to be very similar as a movement to Romanticism 100 years before, at the end of the 18th century, because in a way they were both responding to the exact same thing on a societal level. It's just 100 years on, and you can see that the tone has shifted dramatically. But just like Romanticism liked to explore medievalism, sort of like primal human emotions, passions, like very intense, love and drama and intrigue, to fight against the logic and reason that was coming with the Enlightenment. And just like Romanticism definitely put an emphasis on nationalism, agricultural living, sort of more, like harking back to almost like, the mythical feudalist ideas of cultures. Symbolism 100 years later was doing almost, it was doing all those things, except it had lost its optimism. Instead, they were almost okay with, living in this sort of hedonistic, decadent world that they saw as, devoid of meaning and purpose. They decided to retreat into their own heads instead of fighting against the encroaching power of reason, logic, and industrialization. Psychoanalysis, which was driving everybody, to basically just become overanalyzed husks of what they really were. And this is the thing, art mirrors ideas, and it also rails against and fights against ideas, and in their own ways. I feel like symbolism and romanticism are very much intertwined as movements. Bocklin, Ferdinand Keller, all of these sort of you could argue, I think a lot of people would call them gothic, but they're not gothic. They are more almost otherworldly. These are the artists that I definitely am being inspired by directly to paint these paintings, but you know, definitely I'm bringing also some differences also just from my own head, my own vision. What I find really fascinating and interesting about you know, for example, Belgian symbolism as a movement is that, you know, mirroring that sort of feeling that society had almost reached its sort of inevitable spiritual decline. They used like once prosperous cities and once prosperous areas as a way to sort of channel that sort of decline and almost like populism turned into sort of destruction and decay. And I think Venice was one of their favourite cities to utilise for that purpose, because Venice was once a great trading city, had then fallen into very hard economic times, and then, you know, a lot of these beautiful buildings had just, you know, started falling apart, becoming abandoned. That's where the symbolists went to paint. It's really interesting because Venice, you know, a lot of their architecture is actually paper mache. You know, like a lot of the domes and stuff like that, it's all to do with the fact that it's actually like because of their building techniques, they couldn't actually withstand you know, lots of weight at the top, so they ended up building, you know, these paper mache sort of domes that look very, very grand and ornate, but then, and they put, you know, a facade of rock, for example, over it, but actually it's very, very lightweight and you know, isn't made of substantial material at all. But yeah, it's interesting. In a way, I suppose that's what the Belgian symbolists were trying to capture, this whole sort of decline or and decay of these you know, great buildings that, you know, once were hubs of activity and trade, now gone to ruin. And they made it almost like a dream world, you know, like they weren't trying to almost even utilize that symbolic aspect to prove a real world point. It's almost like they were more just trying to retreat into their own heads, into this fantasy world that they could walk around in. I always feel like symbolist works are very still. They have a creepy, otherworldly stillness to them, much like a dream, like you're in a dream. That's one of the things that I wanted to capture with this painting, was a stillness. Those sort of tombs or caves that I've just painted there, and that far away cave there, very Etruscan in style, very, very similar to things that I saw in Tuscany. But yeah, I think you know, going back to what we were just talking about with symbolism, I think what's really interesting is you know, I don't know, you know, how savvy everyone is with, you know, what the youth are watching right now, but yeah, you know, that's watching this video, but this sort of horror motif now that you find, or sort of sinister motif of liminal spaces, and this sort of idea of utilising what was say a theme park or a mall, or you know, like swimming baths, you know, like long corridors, department stores. What's really fascinating about that to me is that they're using that to create a dream world, this stillness where you're the only one there, and it's very eerie. It's not quite overt horror, but it's certainly meant to create a sort of eerie atmosphere, but you're also meant to feel weirdly calm, weirdly comfortable in this space. Obviously a liminal space is going from one place to the other, but I think that doesn't actually really fully capture why these things are creepy. The reason that these things are creepy is because in all of our childhoods these places were in full swing, and they represented sort of the last throes, the last remnants of a truly prosperous society. All of the generations above mine, for example, are millennials. I'm not a millennial, I'm Gen Z, but above millennials had a society that was extremely prosperous, and that feeling of prosperity is long gone now. Long gone, just like Venice used to be a trading city, and then all of a sudden these like places that were once for amusement, recreation, to show off the might and the beauty of what they were trying to achieve with this populism, this success, all of a sudden becomes derelict, creepy, run down, because it represents the societal decay. It's a microcosmic example of what's going on, societally wide. Looking at why these young people are attracted to things like this sort of liminal space, quote unquote, type video, where you're walking around like a fucking department store. Sorry, I shouldn't swear. A department store from the 80s, or swimming baths that were clearly made in the 1970s. The reason that I think leaves a lot of young people feeling eerie but yet calm is because these were the places that they spent their childhood in, but they were in their childhood. Even then they were in their last throes, and they were just about to all close en masse, and they started to almost represent something. They started to represent a bygone era. And yeah, I do feel that I, as a kid, used to go to a place called the Magnum, and it had all that sort of aesthetic of the white tiles on the wall, and the greasy hamburgers at the shop outside, that were cheap as chips, but and awful for you, but you would get it after you'd went swimming. And it had this ginormous big swimming area that was designed for children, that had slides everywhere, and then it just all just became abandoned, derelict. It lay derelict for years until eventually it was knocked down, and that was that. This sort of pillar of my community, like where tons of children went to play, gone. And the time that it represented, probably a better time, a more hedonistic time, a more, and this is the thing. I'm not saying that, because a lot of the reason why societies have lost their meaning and purpose is because gradually we have pushed meaning and purpose out of our societal lives. And this is the problem, is that these sort of superficial facades, these sort of attempts to fill a gap with happiness of this sort, without any spiritual spiritual significance, it doesn't work. This is why I think, a lot of these things feel eerie and ominous. Anyway, I'm rambling on, but I think, this was a fun one to paint, especially in a symbolist style. But wasn't easy. I think once I get to the tomb, I'll explain more in detail. I mean, I think things like this can really push you. You want it to turn out a certain way, but yet a lot of the time you have to remember also that you are on time constraints and on size of canvas constraints and material constraints that a lot of these things that you're trying to base this off didn't have, but also just also trying to make it sort of your own and capture what you want to bring out of it. I made a few very pivotal decisions in the painting of this piece that really changed the course of the painting, which I will explain when I get to them, because originally, so the way this painting actually turned out isn't quite what I had envisioned for it. There were definitely going to be things that originally I actually expected to be different, but once I really got into it, I started to realise, I need to follow where this painting's taking me in a way. Random thing, but I just want to bring your attention to the cypress tree that I've painted. You see, if you're looking at the cypress tree, right, this is obviously I painted it, before the rocks, but I'm just going to talk about it now. Cypress trees are very, very deeply symbolic. For one, the Mediterranean cypress tree, which is pretty much what you're seeing there, was utilised in a symbolic way. It was burnt for funeral services as a sort of incense, and it also sort of came to be seen as a representation of death. And so adding cypress trees into a tomb scene, for one, the symbolists love to do that, but also I've wanted to do that for a while. I was looking at them in Tuscany, these cypress trees. For one, they're a phenomenally weird shape. They have a very interesting dynamic way to them. They're usually very, very dark, very, very brooding, even in the sun. They're a very dark green. And the way that they sort of just point upwards like that, there's something very powerful about them. Striking. When I painted this cypress tree that you're seeing there, I literally just went in straight with grey, because the chroma of this whole scene, as you can see, is very, 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 very stripped back. It's very, very dark as a scene, intentionally so. So the actual trunk of the cypress tree, and I'm painting another one now, a bigger one. Trunk of the cypress tree is this weird, almost deathly grey colour. You know, this almost pale grey. It makes you think of almost like deadness and dead wood, and like the colour's been sucked out from it. That's definitely what I wanted. Here's the thing though, right? And I'm sorry about the crazy jumps again in time and day, you know, but that's just the way it is. So yeah, I painted the trunk, then I painted this, you know, big, powerful sort of cypress tree going up with all of its, you know, branches. Yeah, that's just straight grey. And the reason that I use just grey is because, again, the chroma of the scene is so like held back that pretty much everything is very, very devoid of colour. So yeah, and you know, this other cypress tree that I'm going to be painting later on, or finishing later on, will be the same. It's literally just grey. Starting the tomb now. Now this was a challenge for me because usually I don't really do human forms in my paintings. That tends to be purely because I don't actually want human beings in my paintings, because I want to put myself into the paintings. But be that as it may, this time I needed to, because you know, I wanted to paint these sort of statues on the tomb which were humanoids. They're not human, but they're humanoid. So I need to sort of, you know, like just dedicate myself to, you know, getting a decent human form here. I actually, yeah, the reason I'm going behind the canvas there is because I poked a hole with my quill, and so I needed to go and sort of fill the hole at the back so that there wasn't a hole in the canvas with paint. I know it's a, you know, not ideal situation, but hey ho, you know, you live and learn. But also I've done it before, and I've filled the back, and it's been fine. So, but yeah, as you can see, I'm adding in this sort of winged demon woman creature in, and then, you know, I'll be painting around these forms later. This is good practice for me. Again, talking, you know, going back to painting human forms and stuff like that, but especially in this way. The reason why I want to practice this more is because I want to do more statue work, more tombs, more, you know, pillars, you know, sort of symbolic things, you know, in the sense of, you know, utilising Greco-Roman architecture and symbolism, and, you know, graves, and just all sorts of different things. So painting human form, or at least statues, is going to be a pretty integral part of that. And so this is good practice for me. That this tomb was good practice in that way, and I needed to address the elephant in the room at some point, that, you know, my human form is probably one of my weakest areas. So, you know, need to practice that, need to, you know, do more paintings with that in it, purely for the more statue side of things, rather than actual human beings in my paintings. But, you know, still important. I think I probably made several mistakes when it came to the way I painted this. I think one of them was maybe using a slightly higher, like maybe making the greys slightly too grey. I think I probably should have toned it back with browns more, but I wanted to almost create like a marble-esque effect, but I don't think I achieved that properly here. I want another go at it. I'm still happy with how this painting turned out eventually, and I still think that what actually happened was decent. I'm not complaining in that way, but I don't think I fully captured the luster of, let's say, a marble. That's something again that I want to work on moving forward, to capture that sort of almost like that sort of magic of like almost like a Maxfield Parrish work, where the marble almost is like glittering. He achieved that with layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of paints and varnish. Don't really want to do that, don't have time for that really. But the way he painted and created these incredible sort of marble-esque effects, and the luminosity that he was able to achieve using glazing is awesome. And so I don't know, like when it comes to something like this, for example, going back to this, I was actually really happy with how it turned out. I'm glad almost in a way it turned out the way it did. But moving forward, I want to be able to have that in my toolbox. Like I want to be able to, paint different forms of rock, different sort of types of rock. That does give like an almost dramatic lighting effect to it, but you'll see how it turns out. I don't think it turns out badly, not by any means. And for the painting, I think it works fine. To have an almost more stony tomb, instead of a marble tomb, like stony sort of greys and this sort of thing. And in a way, if I was going for a more stony effect, I probably would have added some umber in there. So there was definitely a sort of if I was going for stone, I maybe would have mixed my colours differently, and if I was going for marble, which I was at first trying to, and then actually lent into the stone thing, I probably should have done it differently. So there's all that sort of things to consider, but then at the same time, the painting just became the painting that it did, and I'm happy with how it turned out realistically overall. I think it turned out fine, so you'll see. If you continue watching, you'll see what I mean. I think the form of the sort of winged creature turned out fine. Like you can make out, that it has breasts and a torso and legs, and as in like it looks. I think it looks fine. It looks womanly in feature. So I was sort of happy with that. I was sort of happy with how that turned out. I don't think it turned out badly. There were definitely a few moments in this painting process where I was going, oh my god, like, what have I gotten myself into here? I'll tell you about that later when it actually comes. yeah, I mean, I think obviously, as you can see, it's a much brighter rock that I'm painting in here than, let's say, the rocks at either side. And certainly a lot brighter than the almost brownish grey that I utilise for the cave behind it. And I think this does sort of work in the sense that this is obviously, like in the foreground, so it should be more striking, and it should be, right up front and center. So to an extent, I think it works. But the overall chroma of the scene is very, very low, so you also have to make sure that your bright colours don't stick out too much, because that's the danger, obviously. And it can be a very big danger. Bright colours in a sort of low light work just stick out like a sore thumb massively. Like it just makes everything go completely crazy, and you're instantly, the viewer's attention is drawn to those light colours. So you have to be careful to keep everything at almost the same colour level, and just be very, very sure that you're controlling your colours decently when it comes to that sort of thing. When I'm painting this tomb here, I'm also gonna add like stuff on top, but that's gonna come later. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing, like tombs, and this belief of like protecting your ancestors so that they can go into the afterlife. And like I've explored in a previous episode, I think it's very sad that in a lot of ways, these cultures had their wishes disrespected due to the fact that other cultures came along and ransacked the tombs that they had made for their ancestors. But it shows that if you don't protect what you have, if you don't protect your way of life, your cultural output, your beliefs, if you don't protect these things, other cultures are just going to come along and superimpose what they believe and what they think on top of you, right? And your culture, and the cultural significance of your thing is going to die. I mean, look at the pagans of Europe, right? Christianity was superimposed onto all of that, and all of these old pagan beliefs of these cultures completely changed. I mean, obviously people maybe imagine like a hard change to Christianity where all of a sudden paganism almost disappears. It's not quite the case. Obviously paganism was more amalgamated in its regional forms into regional Christianity, and then slowly but surely the paganism disappeared. They used old pagan worship sites and old pagan beliefs, like festivals, traditions, but then started to slowly bleed out the old ideas, and then obviously replace them with the new Christian ideas. This is what happens if you don't protect your culture, then your culture's going to get destroyed. It's as simple as that. And obviously nowadays it's yeah, it's a pretty crazy situation. I think, you know, a lot of countries go out of their way to destroy their own culture rather than build it up or protect it. But I shan't say more on that. Don't want to, you know, put any political points in an artistic video. But on a philosophical level, I do think it's fascinating. I mean, and you know, I will probably be making an Agora episode about this, this sort of concept, you know, about how you can't really have, like, you know, these incredibly profound beliefs in your civilization and expect them to last the test of time without actually preserving them for future generations to come. Like, I mean, it's just a crazy sad thing in a way that pretty much all of these incredibly great civilizations that had their heyday came and went. Realistically, there would have been a last generation that saw those ideals disappear. In ancient Greece or ancient Rome or pagan Europe or Egypt, you would have had last generations of people actually see the sort of fundamental beliefs of their civilization completely disappear. And that's scary. It's scary. Because now all that's left are just buildings and imagination to what really genuinely was believed. I mean, we can read the literature, we can understand the philosophy to a certain extent, but you know, the culture is completely dead and gone, and we're never going to get that back, you know, and they're never going to get that back. And the people that actually existed then that wanted to preserve and protect that culture, they obviously didn't get their wish. You know, that is gone forever now. You're not going to get that back. As soon as a culture starts that decline where, you know, it stops protecting its interests and it stops protecting its output and its core fundamental beliefs, that's it. You know, you're not going to get your culture back after it's already been lost, you know. A lot of the time, you know, quasi-resurgencies try and get made, but it's not the same, is it? Like, obviously, you know, these people that walk around, you know, calling themselves pagans now, you know, it's not paganism like you would have seen in pre-Christian Europe. Just the same way that Mussolini's fascist Italy wasn't anything like the, you know, the Rome that I think he was channeling in his symbolism and usage of sort of speeches and public spaces, and sort of harkening back to a time where Italy was far more powerful and culturally important. You know, basically, I think Mussolini's fascist Italy, whether he liked it or not, was a symptom of modernity. Just like fascism is a symptom of modernity and communism is a symptom of modernity. Like, none of these are, you know, like even if you try and harken back to traditional motifs, you're not actually a traditional movement, and a lot of the time it's just because the modern world, or at least the world that generation's in, won't allow that to happen, because society is completely different. It's not like, you know, you're ever going to get that time and place back where, you know, those beliefs actually made sense, because you have to operate in modern times in order to find solutions to modern problems. I suppose in a way, I know this probably makes absolutely no sense, like maybe I'm just completely ranting and rambling, I probably definitely am, but you know, I don't care. I suppose in a way it's a bit like, you know, a lot of people utilise the internet, influencers and stuff like that, to tell people to get off the internet, you know, and that can be done in a very sincere way, in a very real way, in a very, you know, beautiful way, but it can also be done just a pathetically fake way, you know, where you have some 20-year-old woman basically, you know, walking around as an influencer going, oh, like, you know, I'm detoxing, dopamine detox and all this crap that they come out with, while filming themselves every single minute of the day, and telling people, oh, you know, like, you should maybe get offline, you know, like, social media is bad for your self-esteem, social media is bad for your brain. Yeah, I mean, that's all true, but obviously you're not practicing what you preach when it comes to that, are you? Because, like, you're filming yourself every minute of the day, whereas sometimes, yes, like, I think if you're making, for example, like a philosophical video or a video that's sort of exploring the negative sides of technology but utilising technology to spread that awareness, that makes sense. And the reason that makes sense is because that's where the audience is. You need to go where the people are. Mussolini's fascist Italy, he had to operate in modern times, even if he wanted to sort of try and manifest a more traditional society, or harken back to a more traditional society. He had to utilise the time he was in and the methods of that time. You know, and it's just like, you know, anything, right? Like, I mean, you know, because the societies that are being created, like, you know, in, you know, each generation, the societal changes, you have to, in order to not be alienated, in order to actually have any impact whatsoever as a thinker, you would need to operate within that time frame, and you know almost follow the cultural and social motifs of that generation in order to make a change. I think in a way that's where, you know, that this whole, like, some people can bring themselves to utilise TikTok and stuff like that. I'm not so sure I can, but you know, it's sort of the same idea. If that's where the young people are and you want to change things, then, you know, you're probably gonna have to utilise it, right? I don't like that thought. I don't want to use short form content. I don't like it. You know, I think it's horrendous for people's brains. You know, attention spans are being absolutely shot in the modern day. Hippocampuses are shrinking. We are regressing in terms of our biological evolution and our neurological evolution. I think that, yeah, these are definite warning signs that our society is not moving in the right direction. Sorry, I'll stop talking about this sort of thing. Back to more artistic things. Yes, this is where I started to paint the door, or not the door, the sort of entrance. The deep dark within the tomb. And at first, I completely mucked up the angle of where exactly the darkness, the abyss, was going to be, or at least it didn't really look right to my mind. Do you know something? The more I actually look at it from this angle, the more it actually probably would have worked. Like if I had actually put the blacks in, like it just basically would have made it a different angle. Yeah, no, that actually would have worked. If I had put the black in there and then put that actually would have worked. However, I changed it. Which, to be fair, maybe looking at it from this angle, I shouldn't have. But I suppose this is one of the advantages of filming yourself in a way, right? Because when you film yourself, you can learn, from watching yourself back and going, oh, wow, that actually would have made sense in a way. So that's interesting. That's very interesting. Because that's basically you basically would have been going in sort of from an angle, whereas I then changed it so that you were basically going in almost from the front, which I still actually I like. I like what ended up happening, to be fair. But that's interesting. The fact that I changed it when in reality maybe I didn't actually need to change it, the angle. I still like that though. I like that entrance. I like how the sort of sand sort of goes in, to God knows where. I mean, because you actually don't know whether that will go down, for example, into a deeper chasm underneath, which I like to think it probably will. Who knows, right? That's the thing, with these darks that you utilise in a painting, who knows what's in that tomb? Who knows where it goes? There's something really cool about that, I think. There's something very, very cool about that. The utilisation of that, just mystery. Yeah. That's interesting about the door, though. Because it really is, the changing of that angle, to me it seemed necessary at the time to change the angle, but actually looking back at it when I've been filming myself, it's actually wasn't needed at all. It was, you could have kept it at that angle and just worked away at it, but yeah, wow. Really interesting. Really interesting. yeah, I'm still happy with, you know, how it ends up turning out anyway. I think, you know, in the way that the door ends up looking, I think, you know, it's fine. You know, I also like how, you know, there's like that sort of bit of sand at the bottom. I think that's sort of creepy, and I like that, you know, as if and again, like very still. Like there's a definite stillness to it, which I like. I was also frustrated at the angle of this, you know, the sort of little front entrance thing. And so I started playing around with that, you know. I think maybe it might actually be the case that maybe also would have been the right angle at the beginning, and then I start messing around with it, which then ruins it. But nah, I don't think so, because I end up basically just bringing the vanishing point in a little bit, I think, from what I remember. But yeah, and then obviously water is going to be, you know, lapping around here, you know, around this little entranceway. So yeah, that's interesting though. Changing the sort of shape and angle of where the tomb is actually going to be entered from. This is probably another thing that I could have done better, you know, in the sense that, you know, I mean, I still think it works. Like, I still think the end result works, but you know, like the floor is a bit darker than the tomb itself, so part of me is a little annoyed at that. I mean, I did that intentionally when I was painting it, but you know, could it have been done better? Probably. And then, you know, but the thing is also is that, you know, like I wanted to originally have the whole thing sort of look very like a homogeneous piece of rock, you know, like as if it was almost like, you know, again, just like one big bit of marble, sort of, you know, like same sort of shades. But then eventually when I actually got into it, I preferred the look of sort of made it look a bit more stony, and then, you know, I think that sort of ties in with that, in the sense that, you know, then I also made the floor a little bit different from what I had originally intended also. Now I start adding the water in. You know, usually I'm pretty decent at water. There was a thing that I did here, you know, when I was painting the water. You know, it's a bit off yet, but I'll, you know, obviously like talk about it when I do it. That was just a big mistake. In fact, I think I actually made a fair few mistakes with the water, when in reality I should have just left it alone. And you know, I guess that's again, like, you know, it just shows you sometimes that what you put originally, you should just leave well alone, you know, instead of mucking around with it. But yeah, I wanted these sort of lighter blues, and eventually I bring in greens as well. I wanted these lighter blues and greens to be nearer their tomb for multiple reasons. One, because I wanted it to look shallower, and two, because I wanted these ethereal colours to be or to be in the painting and to sort of pop and to sort of you know, give that sort of ethereal atmosphere, or at least help lend itself to that ethereal atmosphere. So I wanted these sort of almost nice shades, these sort of like shades of blues and greens in the water to, I don't know, evoke a certain something. They do in me. Like when I see that sort of tint of water, it really makes me go, oh, like I really, like, it feels like a dream world almost. I think water's really good for that as well. Like water just feels magical when you utilize it in certain ways. Like, you know, it's almost like a Disney ride, you know. Like a ride that you'd see in like Universal Studios or something, where, you know, you go tomb raiding or whatever, or you go into like a pirate's cove, or, you know, some thing like that, you know, back in the old school days of imagination, where you would have adventures like that. You know, in moments like that, I think a lot of the time water really lends to the atmosphere, and the colour of the water really lends to the atmosphere of what you're trying to achieve. And so I wanted a sort of ethereal, dreamlike blue and green at the front, just so that you know, it sort of I at least made me think of that sort of dreamlike stillness of what I wanted to capture with this tomb. And then darker colours, you know, like at the sort of, I would say back, but then obviously it's the front of the painting. But you know, away from the tomb, I wanted more dark greys and blues and all sorts of stuff like that. So I worked on this for a while, you know, worked on the water, ended up ruining it, which you're just about to see, and then had to work on it again, and I think I did something else that I didn't like, so I had to work on it again. So the water was quite, you know, ridiculously long actually for what it was. Like, I mean, it shouldn't have taken the length of time that it did, but hey ho, you know, you live and learn. I can't actually remember when I decided to just suddenly go and just ruin, you know, like all the water that I've added in so far. But you know, looking back on me painting this, you know, I'm relatively happy actually, just like pretty much leaving it at that. I probably should have just left it at that, because the water looks sort of still and magical, and I don't know, it's got something to it, it's got a quality to it that I like. Just tidying up the tomb a bit, because I thought one of the edges didn't look sharp enough, so I wanted to add like a little bit more to it. Now I wanted to add just, you know, some greys here and there to the tomb that I just were annoying me a little bit, you know, to the rocks, you know, just so that there's not brown shining through from the canvas. Obviously a little bit shining through here and there is no big deal, because, you know, brown works a lot of the time in the compositions that you're trying to achieve, but yeah, I mean, you can't have too much of it shining through, or else it's not good. So yeah, wanted to just add in some greys there just to fill in that those browns. And that looks fine. I mean, if I had just begun the sky at this point, you know, it would have been fine. But what I mean, I'm adding in rocks. Yeah, I'm adding in faraway rocks. But yeah, I didn't leave the water like that. I decided to do some weird antics with the water. But actually, you know, in saying all that, I do think, you know, eventually we've talked about multiple times on this channel before, we've talked about, you know, one of the jobs of a painter being pushing through. And just doing things, owning them, moving forward and going, look, even if it was a mistake, you know, you have to move forward and you have to just, you know, keep on marching on, really, don't you? So, and a lot of the time, you know, painting is about making decisions under pressure. We've also talked about that before on this channel. So, yeah, you know, if I could go back and, you know, go, no, don't do that to the water, would I? Yeah, maybe, but then at the same time, I also think what ends up happening to the water was good in a way, because then, and this is sort of what I mean, it ended up adding in more detail that then actually was like utilised in the end result. And so actually, sometimes making mistakes and layering on top and making mistakes and just experimenting is a good thing. You know, it helps you, you know, have a more sort of layered dynamic painting. So yeah, this was just, I don't know, really not good, is what this was. I just had the white too thin, I think, and then it just ends up not looking good at all. Although, do you know something, like, again, looking at it from this angle, as it's being, you know, played back and painted back, I could see how what I was trying to achieve could have been achieved. You know, I actually, like, looking back on it, I'm going, see if you had just done that a slightly different way, it would have worked. But the way I did it, it didn't work. And so, you know, had to go back to square one and do it again. I did try multiple different ways. Yeah, I mean, as you can see, I'm trying to. Yeah, I mean, that just turned into a big mess. Not good. Oh god, I was like, no. So then, yeah, I had to go in and cover all that up again. It was just, yeah, not good. But then, as you can see, it actually ends up, you know, fine, because it's just adding, you know, some slightly different colours in and making it look a bit more interesting. And who cares, you know? You just have to keep on plodding away with things until it looks good, and that's that, you know. Don't ever be scared to try something. That's definitely true. I mean, when you're painting, don't ever be scared, you know, to go, oh no, like, if I do this, you know, it might potentially muck it up. Like, who cares? You know, who cares? At the end of the day, you need to try to get the best painting that you can get. That's the most important thing. Yeah, and then this, I mean, this is a more sort of tried and tested technique for me to get sort of cool water effects, but even this I sort of regret doing, because again, I want the water to be still. I didn't want the water to look choppy or anything like that. So, but you know, I always intended to blend it out, which is obviously what I'm doing now. But yeah, like, you know, I didn't want the water to look like it really had a lot of movement. So, yeah. I mean, should I have just left it alone? Don't know. I mean, as you can see, this is definitely adding a different dimension to the water. But then I end up not liking the white taking away from those greens and blues, so I go in again and add more greens and blues on top of that, and then I just keep on working at the water, basically just to get the effect that I had at the beginning. So, you know, it wasn't ideal. I spent too much time on the water doing things that I didn't need to do at the end of the day. But again, you live and learn. I mean, there definitely is, again, like, that's what I was talking about, is, you know, some of that residual texture that I've left in definitely, I think, makes the water look slightly more interesting and sort of cool, and some of the white definitely actually does make the blues and the greens pop more, you know, near the tomb. So, from that perspective, it's not bad. Wasn't a disaster, you know. But yeah, a lot of wasted time with the skies. Yeah, I mean, the sky was something else that actually ended up changing, because at first I was going to put stars in. Oh, I mean, here's the thing, it actually changed multiple times. My first idea was to add in a sort of ethereal, almost northern lights, aurora borealis type sky, with oil paints. You know, so basically what I was going to do is I was going to add in black so that I could then paint with oil paints on top. Excuse me. And then I decided, no, not going to do that, because it will make my cypress trees disappear. So I didn't do that either. So then what I ended up doing, well, I went, okay, I do want stars in the picture. So I sort of told myself that I was just gonna paint a sort of pale, creepy blue sky, you know, with all sorts of sort of interesting colours going on, you know, like some blues and some greys and maybe even some greens. And then I was gonna paint stars with oil paints. That never ended up happening either, because I started wrestling with the idea in my head. I was like, will it actually look better? Will it actually add to the painting? Eventually I settled on no. You know, once we actually get to near the ends of the painting here, you know, like, you know, I might look back and go, I was wrong. But, you know, let's see how it all pans out. one of the things that I was happiest with was the cypress trees. So I didn't want to have them lose their shape, because I thought that they turned out really cool. So, especially this big, sort of bulbous cypress tree that I'm painting around now, I didn't want him to lose his shape. So that was sort of one of the reasons why I didn't want to add the black in, because traditionally when I paint Aurora Borealis skies, I would add in a black background, let it dry, then go in with oil paints and paint on top. If I was to have done that here, I definitely would have ran the risk of losing my cypress tree shape into the black. Didn't want to do that. So I decided to go with the haunting blue and green. Which I do think that was the right decision. I do think it works. I think it lends itself to the painting. But what I'm a bit worried about is, should I have added stars? I just don't know. I still don't know. It's a conundrum. I think it could have looked really cool, but also I do think that the way it is right now is a bit more still, like maybe a bit more hazy, like maybe the stars would have been a bit distracting, like they might have added maybe a more cosmic fantasy element, but the sort of creepy blue-green sky that we're getting now is a lot more almost ethereal, and so it doesn't distract. It doesn't distract from the overall feeling of the scene. I hope not, anyway. Actually, I like the way some of the green in the sky turned out. I mean, when I paint Aurora Borealis scenes, I actually, traditionally in oil paints, I used to just go straight in with phthalo green into the sky, and it used to produce this beautiful ethereal glow, this greenish glow. I used to love it. Whereas I'm actually a lot of this cloud colour I'm painting with like this a sort of off green colour that I was using in the water, which is like green, raw umber, Paynes Grey, blue, white, you name it, all mixed in together to make this sort of muddy green colour. And in the sky, I think it worked. I did like a, because I wanted it to almost look like creepy poison gas almost. Like I don't know how to describe it. Again, this ethereal glow, this ethereal green light glow, which I think it worked. I mean, at this point I still believed that I was gonna add stars in to this whole thing. I believed that I was gonna add stars in, but never ended up doing so. But it's weird because a lot of the time, obviously, what you're doing is you're painting something with the next stage in mind, and so if you don't actually add that stage that you believed you would need to add the painting can look so wildly different from what you originally thought it was going to, but also a lot of the work that you were doing in previous layers and previous stages can actually end up working against you if you decide to make decisions later on in a painting, which is why I think it's so important to always make sure you have a sketch, a concrete plan, but also keep yourself semi-flexible, go with the flow a little bit. You need to, you absolutely need to, because if something changes, then geez, like, you're gonna need to be able to move with that, to lend to make the painting really become its own and actually follow where the painting's taking you, because a lot of the time your original intention isn't actually what ends up being the most useful for the painting. I mean, ideally, in a way it should be, and that's, I'm a firm believer, as I've said multiple times, in sketching, so that there are no surprises, like trying to alleviate that as much as possible and make sure that you do have a concrete plan, because so often it just goes so wrong when you don't. But no, I think you still have to prepare for every eventuality, and you still have to prepare for the likelihood that if something does, go a different way, you're going to be able to deal with it in your stride and forge past it, rather than get all panicked and not be able to move past it. Right now I'm adding in this ethereal blue fog with oil. So I always, when I painted this painting, I wanted this blue fog to be in it. I always imagined this sort of creepy blue thick fog encroaching on parts of the painting, but it took me longer than expected yet again to actually get a result that I was happy with, when in a way I actually expected this to again just be a breeze, a doddle. I didn't expect this to turn into something that was difficult or time consuming, but it ends up not quite looking the way I wanted it to, and so I ended up working at it for quite a bit of time in order to actually sort of capture what I really wanted to bring out of it. So yeah, because I thought this sort of creepy blue glow from the fog would add to almost like a paranormal, ethereal, ghostly, dream-like scene. But the way that it was going, it wasn't capturing what I wanted, and it was just making a mess. So, which is weird, because usually fog is fine for me. So yeah, I started adding in some darker blue to try and make it a bit more three-dimensional and just, work away at it a little bit. I think the end result was fine. I do. I think eventually I got there, and I think eventually it did start to look okay, but it was a little bit of a struggle. More of a struggle than I thought it would be. To get this fog right. Strange, really strange how sometimes things that are completely in your wheelhouse all of a sudden give you trouble. Don't know if any other artist or anyone else has ever had that. I expected this to be the easiest part of the painting, and instead it turned into a bit of a nightmare. where I was just a bit like, oh no, like, have I just ruined this whole painting because of just one stupid thing. But no, I don't think I did. I think eventually it did start working with me, not against me, and started to actually look like it belonged in the scene, you know? Did take a while though, did take a while. I mean, if you've never watched me before and you've never watched me paint a mixed medium before, I just want to remind you that this is not the same day. This is, and this oil layer is, like a day after all, most of my acrylic stuff. So I'm letting the acrylics dry, a great deal before doing any of this with the blue oil paint. Maybe I'm just doing an oil paint, layer because I want to keep oils alive in my heart, so that I don't abandon them completely. Maybe that's what was going on. Maybe that's what I was trying to do. But I thought I needed oils for this. I really did. I thought that this would look really good in oils because the way the colour pops. And actually, going back to the conversation that I was having previously in this tutorial, actually the sort of saturation of the oil paint colour ended up being a bit intimidating because of how low chroma the rest of it was. The blue really stuck out. But I don't know, I think I eventually got a result that I was quite happy with, It does look sort of like thick blue fog that is rolling around and just being generally creepy and ethereal and interesting. And then I also decided to strip back a lot of the paint from the water just to let some of that light blue and green shine back through again, so that you can see it a bit more vividly. Which I do think helped the scene quite a big deal, or quite a great deal, because I added that in to look ethereal, I think those colours go quite well together, so as you can see, I'm bringing out the blues underneath that I painted in acrylic near the tomb, so that it pops a bit more, and then just continuing to add like a little bit of three-dimensionality to the fog. Yeah. And I debated for ages. I think also when I was doing this fog, I debated for ages whether I should, do the stars. And I was just constantly wrestling with it in my head, like going, should I not? Should I not? Eventually, of course, I settled on, no, I shouldn't. I kept it like that, so that the sky was just that creepy colour, that you can see that creepy blue-green colour, and that's the final result. I like it. I do like it. I think, you know, it definitely is like an interesting, creepy painting. So yeah, you know, I think it's been, again, just like my last few paintings, I think it's been a learning experience. It's been important to do, and I think moving forward it's going to really help me, you know, practicing these things so that I can take lessons from them and take all sorts of, you know, like experience from them, and hopefully produce better and better and colour paintings. And yeah, I think this was a really fun, interesting challenge to do, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching it, and sorry for rambling too much, but see you for episode 16. Thank you and goodbye.